I will also say that Rob Liefeld has a podcast.
Yes.
And called Robservations. And I'm not going to go into his art, whether I like it or not. It's not what this is about. No. I'm also not going to go into the podcast, whether I like it or not.
Sure.
But even over the course of one episode, there will usually be a nugget or two of fact that are useful for this kind of story. So he does speak about Wolverine at one point being pitched as a teenage character.
That is
yes. And so he initially, there was talk of him maybe being that way. And then as the writers, Len Wein and Claremont, get hold of him, they don't go in that direction. But there was a moment where it could have been either way, or he's conceived as being a new teenage mutant. And obviously it doesn't go that way very fast. But anyway, how old are these characters? I always thought they were, generally.
Sure.
In my head, Colossus was maybe 18 to 20.
Okay.
Because he's still got a little sister. He's working on his parents' farm. He's living with his parents. He could, he's a brute of a kid, like Clark Kent in Superman for All Seasons. That farm boy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Storm. And again, 18 to 20. Kurt, I couldn't place as a young guy. Wolverine, I always thought was older.
Sure.
Banshee is said to be older.
Government in the next page, of course.
Yeah.
He's a civil servant.
Wolverine is a civil servant.
He's got a pension. He's got benefits. All I'm saying,
Wolverine has benefits. That's the funniest. Yeah. Anyway.
Right. So he gets eye vision. He gets dental care. It's awesome. I just mean, it's really interesting. I just found that as I read it, the idea it's and when I think of the school and I think of the variations of the school, it's always little kids learning to use their powers. And I know that in this iteration, Xavier will help them use their powers. It just, the kid thing, I'm these are all adults to me.
Right.
In their 20s. They're young people in their 20s.
So it takes a couple of years before they start to add those kid characters back into the book.
Right.
Okay. We'll get there, of course, eventually, but they bring in Kitty Pryde, who is, maybe 12, 13, 14.
Right.
And that version of X-Men, I think still that what we're getting to eventually, maybe a year from now, that is the version we will see every iteration. In the cartoon, they replaced Kitty Pryde for Jubilee.
Sure.
As being the young
way
in. Yep. In the movies, it's Rogue originally, that young female character they bring in. But that's the formula that really works. It's that young character meeting all these older characters that are the superhero adults, and then there are the kids that are training.
Right.
And then there are the little ones who aren't even training yet. They're just going to school learning how to not use their powers. But that's the version of X-Men that we will see develop out of this.
Right.
Yeah. Very cool. So then Kurt gets 3 full pages. Neat. Then we get introduced a scene in Canada, which of course I always thought was really awesome.
We should have a Canada alert page alert button. Woo woo! Canada Comics alert
on Towing Around's live stream. If 4 Canadians comment in a row,
right.
He calls it a Canuck 4, and he gets very excited. Anyway, I've been able to participate in the Canuck 4, but anyway, that's Towing Around for you.
I like that.
Neat. So,
did you know there's a secret base in Quebec? I didn't know that.
Of course there is. So Wolverine gets called into the office on the air base where he is stationed, and he meets Xavier. Right?
Yes.
You want to flip?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's that encounter where Professor X wants to recruit Wolverine. Of course, Wolverine's superior officer doesn't like it. So Wolverine cuts the guy's tie, nearly slashing his jugular, his rib cage, everything, and says, "I'm going to leave."
Yeah.
And you can't stop me. And then there's the foreshadow of, this isn't the end of it. Wolverine.
And one thing that is very clear, and if it's intentional, it's intentional. If it's just ideas, if it's plotting for storytelling, you and I have talked a little bit about this, is that because of what we know happens to these characters in the comics after this, because we have this knowledge, we're not starting from ground zero.
Right.
This book could be seen as so much foreshadowing.
Right.
Whether or not those ideas are actually fleshed out, or just ideas, or they're just kind of happy mistakes or happy coincidences.
Sure.
There is so much you can take out of this. Be like, oh, that connects to this, that connects to this. Anyway.
It's not a sidebar, it's parallel to this, but it's a good tangent. This comic was partially reprinted in 1985 or 86, pardon me, in Classic X-Men #1.
Right, because
amazing cover by Arthur Adams. And this was my way of getting hold of this moment in X-Men history. I was reading X-Men at that point, so I'm just about 11 years old. And now I'm collecting 2 titles of X-Men every month. And for me to get a chance
reprints of each other?
Pardon me?
Are they reprints of each other? You're like, oh, it's the same book.
Well, I didn't have Giant Size #1. That didn't happen until I was a teenager. Right. I tracked down a copy at a collectible show, not a comic show, but just a collectible show. And in it, they make the editorial decision to not use all the pages and to make new pages to actually make the story flow better. Right. And you can argue that this is a better comic in terms of storytelling than that one. So there's new pages written by Claremont, who comes to be the definitive X-Men writer for 17 years, and new pages drawn by John Bolton. And they're great. And you're going to laugh when I tell you what eventually happens. But they basically go through the part where they introduce all the characters the same, although panels are rearranged a tiny bit to make room. But I really love how, again, the Nightcrawler story, there's a beginning, middle, end, and it ends clean on a page. The Wolverine story, there's a beginning, middle, end, and it ends clean on the bottom of the page. This is kind of basic storytelling. It ends a scene. A page is a piece of art. The page has a beginning, middle, end. The act has a beginning, middle, end, or the scene does as well. But now we go to the next one, and this is now 2 different scenes on one page. Yeah,
I'm also going to say too, kudos to Wolverine for again leaving that nice civil servant job. He gave it up pretty quickly, which as a civil servant myself, I don't know many who just like give up and leave. They're like, "There's a lot going on here. I'm interested in my work. I had this great benefits plan." I'm just saying he gives it up. So good for him. Go do your own thing, Wolvie.
Sure.
Proud of you, bud. Okay, next page.
So that we're on now to Professor X finds Banshee at the Grand Ole Opry. You know, Banshee was a villain or misunderstood character in the original run. They have an encounter with him, so they know him as a mutant, and he's a little older, so he's definitely not going to the school for gifted youngsters. He's going to be going there to be some sort of he's coming in like Joe Thornton on the Leafs last year, you know, to be an elder statesman.
That's not for this conversation. That's a whole other story.
Well, you know what I'm saying, though. He comes in as a role model, I guess.
Fight him in Nashville? Like, what's the connection? Aside from just enjoying music.
He's an Irishman who loves country music.
So that's already pre-established.
I don't know.
Okay.
You have my disc with all the X-Men comics on it, so you can go read that issue and tell me. But what I love is that Len Wein is this writer who is willing to do accents and to play with it. And every character so far, you know, Kurt has his German accent, Wolverine has the Canadian accent that we all wish we had, and then Banshee or Sean Cassidy has the Irish lilt, and it's done phonetically in the script, and it introduces some of that stuff. As a kid, like, you get to practice those accents if you like to read aloud, or at least in your head you can hear them.
The writers also go out of their way to Len Wein goes out of his way to identify that Banshee lives in shabby quarters. It could just be like back in Banshee's room. No, he's got shabby quarters.
Shortly in Banshee's shabby quarters. Yeah. And I love how Banshee at this point in the comic is wearing his costume.
Right. He's like, hold on, let me put this on.
Come to my shabby quarters,
Professor.
Yes. But again, this is for a 10-year-old, and so it just moves. It moves forward and not holding back.
Well, and it also indicates the importance of the character on the team. Let's be fair.
Okay, true. And now we move into a new scene. Banshee only gets 2 panels. Remember, Nightcrawler got 3 pages.
Exactly.
I wonder how much we're supposed to care about Banshee. Now we move into some very problematic territory.
Yes.
Professor X goes to Africa, to Kenya, to find a mutant.
You know, this is what Kenya looks like?
Right. There is, of course, there's no city. It's the colonial stereotype, full of problems.
Africa. It's
yes. And I don't want to go too far into the weeds about it, because there are way more qualified people to discuss the trouble with colonial tropes and stereotypes. And anyway, but yes, this is problematic. As a kid, I thought it was, I didn't have any issue, you know, I didn't think anything of it. It matched the other interpretations of East African people and the region that I had already seen, like the National Geographic, women not fully clothed, like that didn't conflict with other things I was seeing in other media. But I was interested in the character and wanted to see how they were drawing boobies. Like I was curious to see what they're going to do, and they avoided it with the hair. It was like good drawing, strategic. Now, of course, you can't look at it without seeing all the problems. At the time, I didn't bump up against it at all. But that's a sign of like where I grew up and the time and place, right?
Yeah.
Now it would be a whole conversation if I was to read this one with my kids or even myself. I do have that conversation as I look through it. I see the problems for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Absolutely. You must have had a funny reaction, like not knowing it was going to be there.
Oh my goodness! So having not read this comic ever, and cracking it open digitally on the old CD-ROM for the first time. Oh yeah, I just went through. I was like, oh my goodness! I just was. Yeah, I would be like, absolutely. This so wrong in so many ways. But also like, I mean, kind of lazy too. Like,
oh, definitely.
That's the worst part about it. Maybe is aside from the racial and political and economic stereotypes and social stereotypes, like the laziness of it's like, I don't know. But hey, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I agree with you.
Comic, I don't know.
I keep in mind, and this is definitely not an excuse, but it helps me understand the laziness, is that there is this monthly grind, and these guys aren't thinking that they're making art that is going to be put on walls in galleries.
Yeah.
They're not looking at it that way. They're looking at putting out pulp, stuff that's going to, remember comics, this generation, by the way, Len Wein is a comics fan who became an employee at Marvel. His editor-in-chief, Roy Thomas, is a comics fan who goes and becomes a creator. That's the first generation of fans who go to work in comics.
Yeah.
And they would have thrown out their comics unless they were saving them. But they knew that it was this disposable commodity. It wasn't something that was treasured, even though it meant something to these guys. And these guys are probably collectors, truthfully. But they knew that the general public was putting them in their back pocket, trading them with friends, moving on. And he's going, as Jerome is saying here, deadline style, the classic John Romita Jr. quote about his art style. But they're not thinking about that someday someone's going to have a university course about how they're portraying.
It's just, yeah.
It is lazy stereotyping. It is harmful in a lot of ways.
It's tough to read. It's difficult to, difficult. I found it difficult to read. Just on the premise of that.
I hear you.
That's all.
Well, I had another thing. Oh, and the other thing I find really ironic, of course, is the subtext to X-Men as a premise is that it's supposed to be in widely discussed subtext is that it is about racism, right? It's these people that are different by no fault of their own that band together and they save people despite the fact that people don't want them saving them.
Sure. Because
it's, ooh, you're a mutant, you're the other. And the comic is created by immigrants and the children of immigrants. And Len Wein as well comes from the same background as Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. And they're American growing up in that version of America that doesn't always recognize its own hypocrisy. Same as every other country and every other group of people, no different there. So it is ironic that there are so many racial stereotypes and given that the allegory of X-Men is about tolerance.
Yeah.
Right? All right.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on.
So Storm's story goes 2 pages, and then she gets the top third, and we're moving on. She's going to join the X-Men. She thinks of herself as a goddess because that's how she's treated, not knowing that there's another way to be perceived. Because, she's ignorant, backwater, uneducated from the point of view of how they're portraying her. Not what I think of what the character could be, but she's portrayed as as being ignorant.
Also unable to wear clothes.
And she doesn't wear clothes. Exotic, or whatever other words we want to use to describe how they're choosing to portray her. And then 2 panels for Sunfire. Again, the character already introduced in X-Men previously. He gets 2 panels.
2 panels.
So
again, importance of character in the actual long run of the story.
Right.
Lack thereof.
And I love the fact that, right away there's like a tea ceremony, or he's drinking
well,
tea.
yeah, that's how Japan works. Have you ever been there?
Right. And the wife is subservient. I'm assuming it's his wife, actually. I don't even know that it is.
I don't even know.
But they're being served.
Yep.
And within one sentence, he's standing in his garden or standing by a tree in his costume.
Yep.
Monologuing that it's time for the world to hear from Sunfire. There you go.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And then we're off to Russia.
And
again, another stereotype. I have to say, I love that bottom panel, that image of Peter Rasputin. They couldn't think of a better last name for him other than Rasputin.
No, because we've already talked about this.
Right. Right.
Also,
I love that image.
That tractor is from
big.
the 19th century.
Well, yes, they do not have modern technology, right? They're
in Soviet Union.
Right. So, I mean, it's still during the Cold War at this point.
Oh, I know. It's just
yeah.
It's in every single one of their backstories is
yes,
like
a problem.
Yeah.
So neat to see. I mean, you just saw New Mutants for the first time. Was it 2 weeks ago? The movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is Ileana. That is the character Magic, who
they don't name. They just name. They say little sister.
Right.
Who apparently cannot hear